So, important reminders. I am a former journalist. I still do well at parties, so it's good. And I also work right now for Red Hat as a community analyst. And my job there is to assist all the open source communities that we work with and get them healthy and strong in terms of, do they need infrastructure? Do they need, technical support? Do they need marketing? So a big part of my job, given my background, works around public relations and marketing. So that's who I am and that's what I do. Another important reminder, and this is very key to what I'm about to talk about, is that April, for those of you who don't live in the United States, April is the busiest time of the year for accountants. This will make sense in a little bit because you seem like a very nice bunch of people. So I'm going to tell you a story. And this is the kind of story you tell around, a bar or a table in a restaurant, but we'll do it here. So in 1995, I was working as a volunteer in the emergency room of a hospital in a mid-level city, Indianapolis, Indiana. And my job there was basically, I wore this cool beige jacket, and I sat at the desk at the emergency room, and when people came in, and under their own power, I would help get them to where they needed to go. And usually that just involved me getting up and taking them over to a room called the triage room, where an actual health professional would check this person out and see how urgent their situation was. So one night I'm working there, and a couple comes in, and they are dressed to the nines. He's got a suit, she's got a nice dress, and she is very much in distress. She's kind of doubled over, really looking green, complaining of being ill. So I do what I do. I get her a wheelchair because she's having trouble walking, put her in the wheelchair, get her a pan, a spit pan, if you will, because it looks like she's going to go at any moment. I wheel her over to the triage. Gentleman behind me that's with her comes with us. There's no line. It was a little slow that night, so it all worked out. Got her into triage. Nurse started seeing her right away. I go back to my desk. About 10 minutes later, give or take, another woman comes in, and she's clearly having trouble walking. And she's kind of dressed in a business outfit. Nothing really stood out, except she was clearly limping very hard. And so, again, I get her a wheelchair and put her in the wheelchair, because, it's a hospital and that's what you're supposed to do. And I take her over to the triage room where the couple is still inside. They're wrapping up. It's been about 15 minutes. That's about how long it takes for a triage session to go. And so just as I'm pulling up and trying to wheel the second woman into position where, she can wait for the other couple to come out, they come out. And as they come out, the first woman, the one who is ill and really dressed up, looked at the second woman and then looked at the man and said, "What is she doing here?" So this is not usually the first thing that comes up in a conversation in the hospital. So I'm like, okay, this is weird. Until the woman that I had basically screamed at the man, jumped up out of her wheelchair, immediately tried to attack the other woman and the other man. And of course, she had a bum ankle, so she fell on the floor. So now I'm really freaking out because a patient falling is like the very worst thing you could possibly have. Hospitals are terrified of that, right? That's why they wheel you out when you leave, so you don't fall and sue them on the way, okay? But anyway, so this happens. She's on the ground, Woman number one is trying to kick her at this point. Man is just standing there like a lump. I tell this story to my daughters all the time because men are dumb. But anyway. But for you, I'm telling this story for another reason. I get in there, I'm separating them, I'm yelling for security. Security comes, we break this up, we get them back into the ER, we get them their own separate rooms. The man, turns out, was married to one of the women, not the woman he came with. Oh yeah, so we can see how this went. Because woman number two was at work that evening. It was April, by the way. I probably left that part out of the story. But since it was April, and since she was a tax accountant, she was working late pretty much every night that month. Okay, so the husband decided that he would be totally safe to go out with a woman who turned out to be his mistress for a lovely dinner in the middle of the week where she got food poisoning. The end of the story, by the way, is they both got treated. They were fine. She didn't break her ankle. It was a sprain. She had light food poisoning. They treated her, released her out the back. And I got to sit with the guy who was miserable in the waiting room for the rest of my shift. And they never came out to talk to him. That is a story. It's a true story. It happened. And I'm telling you this because we're getting to know each other. And it's an amusing, if not sad, anecdote. But if I were a journalist and doing that with my journalist hat on, the story might read something like this. A married couple of 6 years received more than physical injuries Wednesday night when ill-timed visits to the emergency room brought together the wife, the husband, and his mistress. And so on. How I told the same story in two different contexts is the example that I'm trying to make here. Because as developer communities and open source communities, or whatever kind of community that you have, your product, your project, whatever, we all tell stories in a different way to different people at different times. I never tell this story usually in a public setting, because it's kind of funny, but then it also makes people sometimes uncomfortable. So I usually hold it back for friends. One of those, hey, you thought that was bad, wait till you hear this one. So we do this all the time. And the point that is key here is, for all of us, is that you, as people who are interested in telling your own stories about your company, your product, your project, whatever, you need to know how to tell those stories in a way that appeals to the audience to which you are speaking or communicating. And when you're working with the media, they're going to be your conduit. And they're the ones that are going to help tell your story and spread it as far as and wide as you can. A lot of us will rely on social media. And if you're, lucky and you have a lot of followers, that's a pretty good way of spreading the story. You get on Twitter, you toss something out, it gets shared and spread around and retweeted, and hopefully your message stays intact and it goes and it hits a lot of interested people. Problems with that include sometimes the story gets mangled along the way. Words get dropped, words get misinterpreted. The story isn't always told the way you want it. Social media is a game of telephone, basically. And so you can't rely on your message staying intact and reaching a broad audience at the same time. Traditional media, which is what I call people, who write for, publication sites, newspapers, even television in some cases. Traditional media you also run that risk, but the risk is more minimalized because it's still, you're talking to one conduit. It's not getting shared over multiple layers. It's still being taught to one person, and then they disseminate it in one massive blast. But talking to media is not as easy as you think. I'm sure a lot of us here in this room, and why you're here, is you talk to media and you haven't maybe quite got the formula. And there isn't really one universal way of getting media to get you to, or to get them to tell your story the way you want. But here's some insights into maybe how it could work best for you. So a good media will always find whatever story they're looking for. Everybody says, and unfortunately we hear this a little bit more often than we need to right now, that media has their own agenda. And that's been used a lot lately as a disparaging way of describing that institution. But that really, I'll be honest with you, that's always true. Okay, when I'm a reporter and when I'm listening to a story that you're telling me, I'm immediately trying to relate that to something that I want to get across. I'm taking your story, relating it to my background and my knowledge and my experiences, and I'm trying to translate that into something that I think everybody else will want to hear. And because of that, and because I have, myself and my colleagues have also themselves and limited time and resources, we can't tell every story that everybody wants to share. So we're always going to be looking for news that is new. I mean, it's cliche, but it's true. The first three letters of the word, that's your hint right there. It's got to be new. So we're only going to be, especially in technology, where we're only going to be looking for things that involve major changes or something that's new and impactful, a feature that's never been seen before. Those are the things that are going to a media person's going to key on. Or something that has larger ecosystem effects. Perhaps the change that you've made isn't really big for your product, but the impact of that change may have a broader effect on the sector of technology that you're working on. So this is what media is looking for. That is their agenda. They're not trying to mess you up. They're not trying to, trick you. But because they always have that framework in mind, you need to understand that because they're probably not going to ever tell the story of you the way you want it to be told. But that's okay. So how do you connect to the media? And I have about 3 points here that I want to kind of talk about real quick and share with you on best ways that I've seen as a reporter and also as somebody who's had to push out from the other side. Get personal. Now, I don't mean go up to every reporter and buy them a beer and be their best friend. That's weird. I've had people try to do that with me, and PR firms keep, if you've ever worked with a PR firm, they will keep sheets on people that they work with in the media. And I happened to see one of my bios once, and it was really kind of funny because it said, likes to argue. They're not wrong. It's always good to do that with somebody I know in the room because they're not wrong, but you try to be all cool and professional, and it's like, wait a minute, really? That's coming out? It's like, okay. But that level of personal connection is stalkerish and kind of weird, but it's there. But maybe you can't afford a big PR firm to do that. So what I mean about getting personal is something that you can do all the time, is make sure, for the love of deity, that you're connecting with the right reporters. No reporter wants to see it. If I'm covering like open source technology, I don't really care what Microsoft is doing in their Azure department. Okay? I want to get news that's pertinent to me. You need to connect with the reporters that are writing about the technology that you are working on. That's very key. Also, stay on target. By that I mean, when you're telling your story, try to tell the story in a legitimate, authentic way. Please don't mention blockchain or cloud every 5 seconds in your written paragraph or your verbal statement. Okay, blockchain is cool. I'm throwing it in here so maybe, you know, the video feed on YouTube will pick it up. But for you, maybe not so much. You know, we used to call that, when cloud became a big thing, when I was still reporting, we used to call it cloud washing, right? Everybody was about the cloud. I've made a ballpoint pen that talks to the cloud. Really? Wow, okay, that's weird. But I swear to God, that's an honest-to-God press release. Okay, stay on target. It's if you can't genuinely be a part of something that you think is hot or buzzwordy, you know, then you're not. It's okay. Be you and be authentic. Also, be reachable. Okay? If you're telling a story, you need to be able to be available for people to contact you at times that you may not think are normal. Because something might be breaking in your technology sector, and again, it may not be about you, it might be about one of your competitors. Okay? But something's happening with them. What are your thoughts about that? And they're going to call you at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night because they've got an early morning Monday deadline. They want to get the story out there. How do you feel about company X doing such and such? By the way, a tip, so be reachable, be available. Build that trust with the reporter. Understand that they're going to need to talk to you about things that you may not really care about. But if you build that rapport, they're more likely to tell your story better. By the way, big hint, if you ever do talk about your competitors, please don't badmouth them. That is not my Midwestern egalitarianism coming out. That is just common sense. If you go around, like if I work at Red Hat, and if I go around and badmouth SUSE or Ubuntu, and I'm not gonna, you know, because I kind of like those people over there, okay, but if I did that, yeah, it's gonna get hits, and there's gonna be headlines, and we've seen this, we saw this recently at a recent OpenStack event, you know, where people were coming after us. But they're also gonna think, boy, that guy's a real jerk. And I am a real jerk, but at least I'm not trying to do it that way. Okay, so stay on target, be reasonable, and also, thank you. One more thing real quick. When you're talking to your reporter, don't be surprised if they tell the story that you've just told them in a different way. Okay? You are talking about your product, which is the coolest product in the world. But they may be taking part of what you said and putting it in a larger story about a broader ecosystem. Okay, that's okay. Just make sure that you understand that any time you can get your message out in a positive way, whether or not it's your whole story or just part of your story, this is all good. People will listen, and if you build that rapport with the media, then they'll keep coming back and listen to you more. And with that, thank you, since I pushed the button too early. And I appreciate your questions after the talk.